Welcome back to D&D Beyond. And we are very excited because today, as you might have noticed if you were on the dev update earlier, we got Underdark mode. So please expect, it's not the topic of our stream, but we're just really excited about it. So expect that to come up several times. And if you're watching the stream, you just saw the extremely cool intro video for it. My name is Amy Dallen. I am here with Michael Galvis. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. I am so pumped for Underdark mode. I've been waiting for this mode for years. Been asking for it. I had to start working here to get them to make it.
I will cop to being a resistor. I was just like, I don't know. I don't know if I need that. Like, it's already very pretty as is. And then the first time I got to look at it, I was like, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand the joy. So we're very excited. That is here for your characters right now. You can find a toggle for it on your character sheet. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today, we're here to talk about backgrounds. And it is my contention, I am not usually a hot take person, but it is my contention that we are all kind of sleeping on backgrounds as a part of the D&D play experience. I think they are an incredibly cool element because they have both story and game implications, and because choosing a background, well, it's never going to be the thing that you lead with that's most important about your character. It is a crucial step in the development of a character idea that I think gets a little bit overlooked when we talk about what makes for, like, when we talk about character creation in D&D. It can be kind of an afterthought, and I'm here to say it should be a front thought, a during thought? I don't know. Help me fix that sentence, Michael.
I see. I work backwards. I will look at backgrounds first, and then start coming up with a character idea based off of like which background I think looks cool. So I just think that, yeah, I think people sleep on backgrounds, especially on the features themselves. There's some really nifty features that you can work with your DM, with, like in game, to have like do some like really cool things.
And I asked Michael to pick out some of his favorite overlooked backgrounds that we're going to get into today. But first, what is it? What does that mean? If you are brand new to D&D, you might be like, I don't know, backgrounds, the things behind you. Backgrounds are an element of your character that is grouped under description. But after you've picked your race and your class and assigned your ability scores, in the flow, you'll usually arrive at filling out the rest of the character details in the form of a background. You can get the description of them in the basic rules, where they come under personality and background. And of course,
they're right at the bottom of that page. Yeah.
Every story has a beginning. Your character's background reveals where you came from, how you became an adventurer, and your place in the world. Choosing your background provides you with important story cues about your character's identity. The most important question to ask about your background is what changed? Why did you stop doing whatever your background describes and start adventuring? But of course, it's not just flavor. Your background also provides you with some tangible benefits that can be a really interesting or useful element of putting together a character. Each background will have a description that sort of tells you what kind of person this background describes and what kind of life experience that comes with. It will grant you proficiency in 2 skills. 2 skills! This can be really, really great because if you have picked a class and you were like, I only got to pick a certain number and I really wanted all 3 of these, that can be an amazing time to go shopping for a background that fills in the missing one. It will also grant you either 2 tool proficiencies, 2 languages, or a combination, 1 language and 1 tool proficiency. If any of these double up on things you already have as your character, you get to choose an analogous alternative, which can also be very useful. And of course, as I'm excited to get into with Michael, it grants you a feature. And a feature is sort of a semi-mechanical benefit. It is most often a representation of how your character interacts with the world. Which I find really interesting about backgrounds, because backgrounds tell you a lot about how who you were and maybe the way you grew up or the way you've been spending the last couple of years, the things that made you good at, the kind of experiences you accumulated. And later on, it's going to suggest things about who you might be as a person, your attitudes, your likes and dislikes, your ideals, bonds, and flaws, for instance. But the feature itself will often, but not always, be an element of how you and the world are connected. Whether you can find favors with certain sort of folks, where you fit into the class structure of a city, whether you are trusted or not trusted, what advantages you might have. And this is one thing that it's going to depend a lot, of course, on your table and your DM, exactly how useful that is. Because, of course, a good DM is not going to prevent you from talking to a merchant just because you don't have a feature that says, I'm good at talking to merchants. But it provides, I think, a really meaningful and interesting cornerstone for both your role play decisions and for guiding your game benefit choices. And then, of course, most.
If I could, if I
please.
could give an example too, like
Yes.
one of my husband's favorite backgrounds is the noble background. So I ran Waterdeep Dragon Heist last year for my table, and his background was that he was a noble. And I remember I completely forgot what the noble's feature is. I'll go ahead and read it because it's actually really potent. So it's called Position of Privilege. Thanks to your noble birth, people are inclined to think the best of you. You are welcome in high society, and people assume you have the right to be wherever you are. The common folk make every effort to accommodate you and avoid your displeasure, and other people of high birth treat you as a member of the same social sphere. You can secure an audience with a local noble if you need to. There was a point in our adventure that I mentioned just in passing that there was this particular high society party that was going on, and getting an invitation can be difficult. And my husband was like, well, actually, I'm a noble from Waterdeep. So, and it was at that moment, I was like, oh shit, I have to plan a party now. I was just mentioning it as just like a cool little rumor, and like maybe one of you will get to be a server there and just like hear one or two things. But he turned it, because of this feature, he turned it into this, no, let's have a whole session at this party. Because I was born here, tell me which nobles do I know that are going to be at this party. And it sprouted this entire side plot and all of these extra sessions that we did. And it was an absolute blast. And it was all because of just this one feature that I completely forgot about and that he just pulled out and was like, work with this, do something with it.
I love that. That's a perfect example of how it can come up and surprise you and give you directions in play. So the other, like the basic list that your background comes with is it's also going to give you some equipment, which will usually also give you kind of a base economic level. It'll come usually with between 5 and 25 gold, and a couple of distinctive items that are associated with the things your background suggests. And then, of course, it will have suggested traits. Now, this is not the only way to decide what the personality traits for your character are, but each background will come with suggestions that can help you. They're building blocks for a personality for your character. And as we'll get into later, depending if your DM is using inspiration rules, can also be pretty mechanically helpful. And then, of course, backgrounds will often have variants or tables inside them to help you either an option for the feature and the other elements, or a table that will help you to narrow down, for instance, what sort of criminal you are. So that's the basic gist on backgrounds. The basic rules come with 6 of them. The player's handbook has a set of 13, the 6 of which are the basic rule ones. That kind of cover the basis of things you might have come from. In this case, we're looking, I guess I can't scroll down my table of contents there. But I'm gonna just scoot on up to the player's handbook to grab the list from there. Or, you know what? Let's just go for the giant list. Let's go for the giant list of backgrounds. You can find it on DDB under Game Rules. And it can look a little intimidating because over time, those 13 players' handbook ones were added to by a bunch from the Sword Masters. What am I trying to say? Sword Coast.
Sword Coast Adventures Guide.
Thank you. I was trying to say Sword Coast and Guildmasters at the same time. Because Sword Coast and Ravnica added the largest sets of new backgrounds. But a lot of books over the course of 5th edition have added like 2 backgrounds each, and you will find that nearly all, like a large portion of the adventure books, will suggest ways to tailor backgrounds, existing backgrounds, to fit in with their stories. And I think don't skip those, especially if you're doing character creation for a specific storyline. There's some great ideas in there, some great options that might tie background specifically to what you're doing. Some other good options there.
Yeah, I think we saw Descent into Avernus and Wildmount did that, where they kind of like adapted like the Acolyte, or I think maybe the Spy background may have been adapted as well, which is really neat to see, because I feel like these backgrounds are very flexible. You know, they give you a general feel for what your background is, but you know, I'm always of the opinion that you can tailor anything to suit your background. Like if you're a spy, but maybe you weren't like a super spy, then you know you could kind of make it like, well, you know, I was an undercover agent in a faction or something. And,
what I love about that is that what you're suggesting, while that would be like, it's great advice, but it isn't even just sort of home rule advice. It's actually baked in. The player's handbook includes the instructions that you should go ahead and customize your background. You can switch a feature out for a different feature. You can change some of the determinations of which proficiencies and skills might come with it. You and your DM could work out a new feature that makes sense to you instead of any of the established features. That is baked in, that you are allowed to do that. There are, of course, limits. Your background is going to come with 2 skills. It's not going to magically come with 5 skills unless you are house ruling in a very interesting way that I would love to hear you justify. I mean, you know, I'm never going to say you can't do it in your game, but that would have some interesting effects. Which one of the, I'm just curious. Let's see. The 2 Explorer's Guide ones, one is Grinner, which is sort of an entertainer variant. And the other, I feel like I was looking at the Wild Mount. Let's look it up. Let's look at the Wild Mount.
There was a Sage variant, an Explorer's Guide, a Sailor variant, and a Spy variant. There might be others. And the Acolyte.
So they have 2 that were introduced. The Volstrucker Agent and the Grinner are both in the Explorer's Guide. And then there's a section on adapting existing backgrounds. You're right. The Acolyte Luxembourg Criminal Myriad Operative. The Sailor Revelry Pirate. And a good background will often have a very evocative title like that. So that's a great example of how a source book can expand on the basic background options. So next I want to talk about how to choose a background. And we have already looked at some of this. I'm going to go back up to the basic backgrounds list, which I told you earlier was here and then forgot. How to choose a background. And I would say, I love what you alluded to earlier, because this can happen in either order. You can choose based on a story idea and then find a background that fits it. You could choose based on skills that you wanted that weren't granted by your class, or that you think would make a good complement to what was granted by your class. You could choose based on a killer feature. Something that you see. I am a big fan of the folk hero Rustic Hospitality. I just find that one makes my imagination go boom. I haven't used it a ton in games, but it's like attractive in terms of thinking about what kind of person you are. So folk hero is one of the basic rules backgrounds. You come from a humble social rank, but you're destined for so much more. Already the people of your home village regard you as their champion, and your destiny calls you to stand against the tyrants and monsters that threaten the common folk everywhere. This one gives you animal handling and survival, very much a country kind of background. 2 proficiencies, 1 type of artisan's tools, and vehicles, land. It gives you some basic equipment. and there's a table for the defining event that established your folk hero, which is basically cough cough, you need a backstory. And I'm joking, but building cough cough, you need a backstory into character creation is one of the things that I love about role-playing games. Because we are not all, much as I loved the world building stream the other day, but not all of us were born being like, I can come up with 26 countries before breakfast. This is nothing to me. It was an amazing stream, and you should catch it, and they were incredible guests. But if you're coming at it the other way and you're not used to making choices like this, or you might be worried, like lacking confidence, like, oh, is my idea good? You can build that with these tools, or just use them to guide your inspiration by rolling on things like tables to be like, oh, I did steal from a corrupt merchant to help the poor. That actually makes total sense with the things I was already thinking for my character. So I meant to just show off the feature. Sorry. Rustic hospitality. Since you come from the ranks of the common folk, you fit in among them with ease. You can find a place to hide, rest, or recuperate among other commoners, unless you have shown yourself to be a danger to them. A sensible precaution. They will shield you from the law or anyone else searching for you, though they will not risk their lives for you. So they've put some boundaries on it. So this is not a magical plot armor feature, but it is a very suggestive story element, and could literally pay off in game when you're sort of like, we are out of gold and we need somewhere to stay. We can find something because of that time that I robbed from the merchants to help the local populace.
Funny enough, I actually had used the folk hero background for a character. I haven't gotten to play them, but the general idea behind the character was that they're a folk hero, but they never actually did anything to warrant that title. It's just that people falsely attribute some heroic event to my character, and as a result, they have been thrust into becoming an adventurer. So they're just kind of like, they've been like effectively kicked out of their village in order to represent the village and, you know, help the village prosper by, you know, spreading the name of it. I mean, like, oh, we have an adventurer. And so there's just like this poor character who's just like, I don't know what I'm doing. Everyone says that I saved the village, but I actually didn't. And then
that is
just watching
incredible.
them like bumble along.
Incredible character origin, and you've done what they suggest, which is figure out why that leads you into the adventuring life so brilliantly. Also, shout out for the Firefly fans in the audience. That is a beautiful sort of variation on the Janestown plot that it had never occurred to me to use for a D&D character. But I love that the rest of them were like, we're so proud of you. Go off in the world. That's beautiful. So you could pick based on a story idea, you could pick based on skills you wanted, you could pick based on a killer feature, or you could go the other way around. Like you were saying, shop for a background first and let that inform the other choices you make and the kind of character you're putting together. I will say, when I was building for our House of Lament stream, this was a key moment for me, and it often happens, I find, just like my personal mental process of making characters. Oftentimes the character concept will click into place as I'm picking backgrounds, where, like, you know, it's really a question of, you might be a human fighter, but there are a lot of human fighters, and what makes you you? And a lot of times it'll click into place right there. So for me, I knew that we were going into a spooky atmosphere, and I did know that we had a bard and a warlock. So I knew I wanted someone kind of tough and practical, but I was going through my character options, and you don't have to build in complementary ways, but I find that often helps me to figure out what I want to do. So I was going through that, and I was like, gnome barbarian, that's the move. And then I got to backgrounds, and sailor just clicked. And suddenly I was like, oh, I know who she is. I know where, that's the flavor of practicality and salt of the earth that I want for her. And of course, it ended up inspiring some fun fear ideas, which was appropriate for our House of Lament campaign. No spoilers if you're watching it on YouTube. The first couple are out, but the next few will be rolling out soon. Twitch people already know. So
yeah, I loved your backstory, and just knowing that it came out of the sailor background, that's good. That is solid. God, oh man, I still think about Rip every so often. Just like, this poor This poor character.
I already miss our people. But that's, that's how it is with D&D characters. So you can, of course, you can be inspired by your other things to choose a background, or you can let it inspire you. And that, of course, brings us to personality traits. And those are not the subject of today's stream, but they are also something not to sleep on, because they give you not just useful prompts to help you build a personality, a couple of things that you can lean on when you're making role-playing choices. But as mentioned earlier, if you are playing at a table with a DM who is using this particular rule for inspiration, inspiration can be awarded to you for playing on your established personality traits. And inspiration, of course, can be used, exchanged for goods and services, such as getting advantage on a roll, which is just about the most powerful thing you can apply to something you really want to work in Dungeons and Dragons. So I love that your background can give you inspiration in multiple meanings of the term, and therefore I think is like, I don't always fill out both of my traits and my ideal bond and flaw, but I nearly always do, because it sort of helps me to ask and answer some basic character questions, and I like to get advantage on things. So
Yeah, I admittedly I tend to skip this part just because I sometimes some of the options don't quite fit what you had in mind. But like you said, it is a good way to just sort of inspire that sort of like, well, this doesn't quite work, but oh, you know what would work is this, and kind of using it as a way to sort of like brainstorm your backstory.
which I think is perfect. And they are suggestions. The idea is you're going to have these whether or not you pick the ones based on the background. But if you are going with this background and you want something to work on, and or if you just like random selections as a mechanism for putting characters together, they are available to you. And sometimes not liking any of the existing ones is how I come up with what I want my person to be like. Because I'm like, no, I don't feel like she would do any of these things. And then that's the next step to, okay, so what would she do? All right. Overlooked faves. Michael, what have you got for us? What are your favorite backgrounds, or the ones people are not appreciating out there enough?
Oh boy. Okay. I have to if you haven't picked up Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, you need to check out at least the investigator background. I don't know how overlooked it is, but I will tell you that if you haven't looked at the proficiencies, it is such a solid option. You get so you get to pick two out of these three: insight, investigation, or perception. I think investigation and perception are probably the most commonly used proficiencies in the game. I mean, definitely perception, just based off of the fact that you need to be able to, be aware of your surroundings. But you also pick up two really great tool proficiencies. You get a disguise kit, which is always fun for antics. Whether you want to perform in front of a full audience of people disguised as some great actor, you're going to need a disguise kit, or if you want to try and like disguise yourself as some bandit so you can sneak into a hideout, it's always going to be useful. But you also pick up thieves tools, and thieves tools is really worth pointing out because picking up that proficiency can be difficult unless you're playing like a rogue, or I believe bards can get it as well. If you're a druid and you're like, well, I like to sneak into cities to steal things in order to feed the animals that are in the forest, but I can't get thieves tools. Investigator could be something that you might be able to work into your background. But I will say my favorite backgrounds that are probably most often overlooked are from Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. So Ravnica is a Magic the Gathering setting, similar to what you're going to see with Strixhaven. It was a set in Magic the Gathering that's been adapted for D&D and has gotten basically taken all of that beautiful, rich lore that's been made for the trading card game and adapting it for D&D. What's really unique about these backgrounds that I absolutely love about them is, although they give you, your standard proficiencies and you get your feature, and it has all of these suggestions for, your personality trait and, the moment that you started adventuring, they also add spells to the spells that you can choose from. They add spells to your class spell list, and that is just absolutely huge, because some of the options that you'll find are just absolutely create new build opportunities without you having to multi-class.
Now, of course, you would want to work out with your DM whether this is appropriate for your game. But if you do, Michael, what can we get?
Okay, so yes, that is a good caveat, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because the backgrounds are specific to Ravnica, so maybe you want to talk to your DM about, like, well, can I adapt this as, like, maybe this is a faction instead? Because as is, they're probably not going to work if you're adventuring in the Sword Coast. But if you're a min-maxer like me, you will find a way, as long as your DM permits it. So just looking at some of the backgrounds from this book, one of my favorites was Azorius Functionary, because it adds the command spell and counterspell to your class spell list, which is, if you're a bard, if you've ever played a bard, you might have wondered, like, why can't I get command? It's literally using my voice to get people to do things. Well, Azorius Functionary will add command to your spell list. Counterspell is also a very potent spell that I often see in when you're kind of like trying to find out how should you build your bard. Like, Counterspell often comes up because it's such a really powerful spell for controlling the battlefield. Let's see what else. There's Izzet Engineer. If you don't know who the Izzet are, they're basically engineers. Well, it's in the background name, Izzet Engineer. But they manage, like, the sewage system in Ravnica, which is this sort of like pseudo-futuristic metropolis. That background gives you animate objects, which is such a good 5th level spell. My goodness. If you've never cast animate objects, pick it up and just pick tiny objects, because you will get so many attacks just off of this one spell, and your DM will probably bury their head in their hands once you start rolling dice. You also pick up Heat Metal and Call Lightning, which I think are fan favorites, just off of this background. And then lastly, Rakdos Cultists. The Rakdos are sort of these carnival type evil cultists, very extreme in the type of entertainment that they offer, and they offer a lot of really great spells to be added to your class list, like Hellish Rebuke. You get Haste, and also Dominate Person, which is just a really great 5th level spell.
I just accidentally stopped on the table and I was like, lampooning satirist. That is not a spell I remember. Slightly different. I love this, and you get things like, you could figure out what fearsome reputation obviously doesn't need to be confined to any particular setting. You could certainly find a way that fearsome reputation is going to work for you, no matter where your game is set.
Yeah, it's also worth noting too, with Strixhaven coming out in December, the setting of Strixhaven Arcavius, the premise is that it's a very easily found university, that people from across the multiverse are coming to this university to study magic. So, you know, these backgrounds from Ravnica can easily be worked for Strixhaven, because you could simply be like, well, I was recruited from Ravnica, and before I joined Strixhaven, you know, I was an engineer, or I was part of
that actually makes perfect sense, and probably does not require any kind of cheating.
Yeah.
And again, not that I will ever encourage, like, stopping you from using any option. It's just between you and your table and your DM what's going to work for your game. Which also means, like, since customizing the backgrounds is, of course, rules as written, you can go in and swap out features and customize some of this stuff as needed. I think it'd probably be up to you whether that applies to the enhanced spell list, but you know, I'm not going to tell you what to do.
Yeah. If I was your DM, though, I would allow it, Amy.
I would love for that to come with either finding an in-world connection, like you just suggested for Strixhaven, to Ravnica, or trying to figure out what the closest analogous in-world element is. You could actually end up developing your own society a little further by figuring out what the version of it is an engineer is for your time and place. Which, you know, once again, I love the way that backgrounds can take some of the work out. Like it's not like it replaces building character, but it can help you give a structure to build on, which is just incredibly helpful. They are tools. All of your game mechanics are tools for telling great stories, and your stories are tools for playing the game. And I love that about role-playing games. I like role-playing games, guys.
I didn't tell. I was sure that you just hated this game.
You just thought I was keeping that secret, just super neutral on the whole concept of rolling dice and telling stories until now. Any other phase that we should mention?
Oh, I think this one deserves an honorable mention. Is the faceless background? I believe it was introduced in Baldur's Gate: Descent into Avernus. Really cool feature called dual personalities. So this particular feature effectively lets you have a second personality, like basically a permanent disguise. And so you'll be adventuring as perhaps your main character, and then at night, before you go to the tavern, you can switch over to your other personality, and it effectively makes you harder to track if you've caught the attention of some enemies. It can make it easier for you to get to sneak into places, if you have a very easy to identify main persona. And if you talk to your DM a lot, and you're in this sort of adventure, like for example, you're doing a Barovia based campaign, and Strahd is already aware and has met your character before, this background can really help you to sort of avoid Strahd finding out everything about you, such as, basically what are your strengths and weaknesses, or like, what do you truly care about that he could hold against you? This is a nice way of kind of toying with the main villain that might be doing some research on you in order to prepare for the inevitable final showdown.
And of course, depending how far you want to take it, this is a perfect setup to create any number. Speaking of, once again, bringing my comic book fan to the table, this is an alter ego feature. This is either, you could say Batman has this for Bruce Wayne, or Bruce Wayne has this for Batman, or they both have it for Matches Malone when he needs to talk to some criminals and get some information on his next investigation. It's a great jumping off point for that. Does this one give you disguise kit? I would hope it does. Yeah, it does. Would be tough to manage without.
Painter supplies, actually.
Oh, weird. I guess you love paint. It's close, I guess. Yes. So those are some things to definitely consider when you are choosing backgrounds and letting them inspire you and/or get you inspiration in Dungeons and Dragons. And why I think that we are all maybe. I don't know who the we is that I'm talking about, but I've decided that they're underrated for the purposes of this and talking about how much I love choosing backgrounds.
You know what? I will admit, Amy, when I first started playing 5th edition, I had no idea that backgrounds were like that they had any sort of mechanical benefit whatsoever. I thought backgrounds, well, I'll just come up with my own background. I don't need to pick from these. And then my friend was like, you need to pick my DM at the time was like, you need to pick a background. And I was like, no, I'm fine. They're like, you need to pick a background. And I started looking at them. I was like, oh my gosh, I can be good at more things. There's really cool features that really add to my character. So if you've just been like, nah, backgrounds, whatever. No, look at them, take a look at them. And if none of them fit you, customize one. I'm constantly reminding people, like, you can make a custom background and it's okay. Like you don't really need your DM's permission to make one unless, the feature is going to be wonky, or you just need to make sure it's, what you've picked is kosher.
Feature, I can fly.
Yeah. Yeah.
No?
That one might not pass some scrutiny.
But yes, I love everything you just said. And specifically, skill proficiencies are kind of easy to overlook, but they're a huge part of how your game experience is going to evolve. You might end up being able to take expertise in some of this stuff or have it interact, like, or save your skills for other things that you can then take expertise in. And that's going to strongly impact your play experience, in addition to all of the beautiful, beautiful story stuff that you get out of your background.
It's D&D.